Alright, so this is going to be a bike lactate test video. My vision is for approximately every 8 weeks for us to kind of do like lactate week. And it's mainly to keep myself accountable and also out of interest. And so I'm not going to give too much of a preamble, because if you didn't watch the swim lactate video, that should have come out like a day or two ago. Go back and watch that, because I go into, really the meat of the details for the why behind this. But I'd say the biggest reason why for doing these lactate tests in the beginning for sure is because it's now been 3 weeks of like doing very little, and also I did 2 races which I tapered into both of those, and so therefore it's really like 7 weeks of really no training. So I would say this is going to be give a nice indication of where our training baseline is. Now the bike, I think, is a little more complex now. I used to think of it purely from an intensity standpoint, but now there's also the aerodynamic equation, and the reality is from our testing, there may be 30 to 40 watts differential between myself and the top tier aerodynamically bikers. And so I'm not going to think of the bike for the next at least 3 to 4 months as being something I really want to increase the power, because the power is already, I would say, adequate if you were inside of a position that was at the top tier and competitive. So it's still, I think, important for us to find out kind of where baseline is, and then of course when we test again in 8 weeks, at the very least we want to maintain where we're at within the context of working on the aerodynamic equation. So that's the logic behind this lactate test here on the bike. You'll notice I'm doing it indoors. Of course we race outdoors, but here in Arizona for sure we run into problems because of such large weather changes. And so from a what are we really trying to accomplish with testing? We're not trying to just get like, hey, look at this great number I did in practice and I should win the race. No, the purpose of the testing is to understand where we're at and how the training protocols are helping or hindering where we want to go, and that's why we'll do them frequently. And so in order to really get an accurate gauge of how the training is going, we need to do these tests in a controlled environment. So the temperature will always be the same when I do these tests. The humidity will be relatively constant. We're doing it on a trainer because there's no stoplights, there's no hills. I'm doing it on Zwift on a course, Tempest Fugit, which is dead flat. And so this should be very repeatable, because the reality is I don't care about what the numbers are per se. I care about understanding if I'm actually getting any better, and so that I don't have to go to races and find this stuff out. I want to actually be better. And of course, as I said, there's also the aerodynamic equation that must be understood as well. So that's the standardization component. The actual test itself, once again, you can do whatever you want. You can make up these things however you want. It should be specific to the training and the demands and the types of intervals you do. So I've decided on, similar to the swim, it's probably not as long as some people would say a lactate test should be, but from a specificity standpoint and as well as a repeatability standpoint, I'm going to go with 6 times 6 minutes at a progressive effort, targets of something like 250, 280, 310, 340, 370, 400, which should be quite a bit below threshold and then should be above threshold. I will do those intervals all in the TT position because I'm most interested to understand how I metabolically am behaving and efficiency-wise behaving while I'm in the TT position. This is the TT position that we developed, you will have saw in our first aerodynamic video. So it is a fairly new position. I have very little training time in it. So the 370 and 400 watt intervals are going to be extremely difficult. So that's what we're doing today, and we will report in after each of the 6 reps, and then also report in if there's anything interesting that occurs. So if you want to do these kinds of things, then I highly recommend trying to standardize as much of it as you can. So in the swim yesterday, we did a standard warm-up. I personally don't think it really matters what it is, as long as it's decently adequate and it's standardized. You need to make a note of it. So with the bike, my standard warm-up for these tests will be 10 minutes easy, 2 minutes progressive, I made it easy. 3 rounds, 20 seconds, you know, big acceleration, standing. 40 seconds easy. 3 rounds of that. And then another, it'll have been 5 minutes easy spinning. And then we'll take the baseline lactate again, just to see kind of where we're starting out. And I won't be surprised if it's actually higher due to the warm-up than the first 6-minute at around 250 watts. Here we are, taking the baseline reading after the 20-minute standardized warm-up. Aaron is the master of taking lactate. Baseline reading of 1.5. So I won't be surprised if that actually goes down after some, you know, constant 250 watt type effort. 250. So we'll see, try and keep it as steady as possible. That was 251 watts. 6 minutes with a lactate of 1.0. So that's probably the exercise baseline in cycling for me. Rep 2 done, 281 average, 0.9. So I'm still under exercise baseline. That's all that means. Crossed aerobic threshold now for sure. Rep 3, 1.1 millimole. Still kind of
not what you were expecting.
No, it's not like super hard. I mean, I've done this more than this for an Ironman, so it can't be very hard. Now though, this 4th rep, we're going to start to knock on the door of threshold, and that, when you structure these, that's kind of what you're looking for. So 340 average here. This is where it starts to get a little more difficult. Rep 4 done. Starting to feel it for sure. 1.5. Oh. Oh yeah. Oh. Starting to hurt. 375. 2.7. We have crossed it. We have crossed the threshold. Oh. Ah. Yeah. Oh. Oh. 4.9. So, a few talking points to conclude the video. First, trainer wattages, for me anyway, are definitely harder. So that's all fine and dandy, because if you're able to push 10, 15 watts more when you go outside at the same RPE, oh, that's just a nice little bump, right? Confidence bump. The important part here is repeatability of the test. And so we are going to be able to replicate this exact test in 8 weeks. And that's why we need to do it on the train. Exact same course, everything will be exactly the same. Secondly, you'll notice a major difference between my swim and my bike is my bike, I'm able still to do quite large intensity jumps every stage. Whereas the swim, the intensity jump is almost 0. And that, I believe, highlights the mechanical aspect of swimming. And one of the biggest problems for a developing swimmer is mechanical breakdown under load. Whereas because in biking I'm just fixed and it's mainly physiological, the power production standpoint, I'm able to keep going up. And, well, of course the lactate goes up with it, but at least I'm getting something for the increased intensity output. In the swim, I'm literally getting nothing except burn more carbs. Make it harder on yourself. So that's the bike lactate test. So once again, we'll conclude this video with a graphical representation of the data. This one is for the bike. So here on the left, we have the lactate in millimoles per liter. And on the bottom, we have watts. And on the right, we have heart rate. And we have all 6 runs here. And as you can see, we were pretty steady. And then we start to ramp up. And then we ramp up really quickly. And then this whole graph was created by Mark Gravelin for us. And he was then able to calculate the inflection point using the Dmax method, which was approximately 344 watts. And I think a little correction here from the previous video, and this is kind of why I like doing these videos, is because it also allows me to learn and grow. And so actually the interpretation of the inflection point is different from depending on who you talk to. You know, what does the inflection point mean? Some people will say it means LT1 actually. Some people will say it means LT2. I don't know if any of it really matters, to be honest with you. I think what you're really looking for is to repeat this test and at the very least have this whole curve shift a little bit here to the right. Somewhere, let's say, you know, even if you had a 10 watt improvement and, you know, rep 3 you did 320 watts, but the lactate was still, you know, down here. And in rep 4, let's say you did 355 watts and the lactate was, you know, whatever this one was, 1.5 millimole, yet it's just over here. That means you are producing less lactate at greater wattage, and hopefully the heart rate also coincide at a lower heart rate. And thus you are doing, for the most part, metabolically, more work with less, I guess, metabolic stress, or at the very least, you're having a greater aerobic contribution, thus clearing more lactate, which I think in the end is the same thing. And that's really the goal of training. And so that's what we'll be looking for 8 weeks from now. So thanks to Mark Gravelin for creating this beautiful graphical representation of the data.